Let's get started. We're learning the topic of our discussion today is Zakein ve'eno lefi chvodo, is a person who's a respected elder. And there are two types of respected elders. One is a Talmud Chacham, in which case it doesn't make any difference how old he is, but if he's a great scholar, it doesn't matter whether his beard is gray or black, he's still considered to be a Zakein. Because the word zakein means zeh shekana chachma, and then the other person is a communal leader who's a respected older statesman of the community, and that usually is only when the person has white hair and is older and is a respected member of the community. So in both of those cases, we saw from the Rav Shulchan Aruch that there's a dispensation that such a person can exempt themselves from the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda if it's Eino Lefi Chavodam, that it's not commensurate with their honor for them to be seen publicly transporting such an item or handling such an item in public. In other words, Farmer John's donkey gets lost and wanders off into the city. It's not considered to be in this rabbi's honor to be schlepping a donkey through town to get it back to Farmer John. So that's an example, right? So the only problem is that there, and this is what we want to discuss today, and we're still in the middle of the Rav Shulchan Aruch because it's a very long piece, is that there are times in halacha where we tell you that when it comes to doing a mitzvah, you should not stand on your honor. And here's a classic example. This is in Siman Reish Nun, which is at the beginning of the laws of Shabbos. It says, Sif Aleph says, Yashkim baboker biyom shishi lahachin sarchei Shabbos. A person should wake up early on Friday to prepare the needs for Shabbos. Va'afilo yesh lo kama avadim l'shamsho, even if he has many servants who can take care of it for him, yishtadel lahachin ba'atzmo shum davar letzarchei Shabbos kedei lechabdo. A person should still try to do something on his own for the needs of Shabbos so that he shows Shabbos proper honor. And then the Shulchan Aruch quotes from the Gemara in Maseches Shabbos, Ki Rav Chisda hayemachatech hayerek dak dak, that Rav Chisda used to chop up the vegetables on Erev Shabbos very finely for the salad or whatever it was. The Rabba v'Rav Yosef hayemevakim eitzim. Rabba and Rav Yosef used to chop the wood. And the Rabbi Zera hayemadlik ha'ish, Rabbi Zera would start the fire. The Rav Nachman hayemetaken habayis. Rav Nachman used to get the house ready, clean the house. Umachnis kelim hatzrichim l'Shabbos, prepare the utensils that were needed for Shabbos. Umathana klei hachol, and would put away the weekday utensils. Umehem yilmad kol adam, and from this a person can take an example and learn. V'lo yomar, and a person should not say, Lo efgom kevodi, I will not degrade my honor by involving myself in menial tasks. Ki zehu kvodo shemechabed haShabbat. Because if anything, that is your honor. By giving honor to Shabbos, you are raising your honor, not lowering your honor. So, okay. So, what essentially you see from here is that when it comes to doing a mitzvah like honoring Shabbos, you are supposed to lower your honor, and if anything, that raises your honor. So why is it that for the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, we don't say that? We say that you should not degrade your honor, or you certainly have a dispensation and say that this is not consistent with my honor to engage in the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. And if you like, it goes even further. If you look at, let's say, the Mishnah Berurah, he says, "Umehem yilmod kol ha'adam." From this, every person can learn. Hainu afilu hachashuv yoter. Even a very, very revered person has to take this to heart. Ubifrat biyamim hakitzarim, and this is especially true on the short Fridays in December, which will be upon us shortly. This Shabbos and last Shabbos are the shortest days of the year, shortest Fridays of the year. Umakol shekein kisharoa shekvar hu samach l'Shabbos, and this is very true, especially if you see Shabbos is coming very soon, and we're not ready. Sha'az hu mechuyav la'asok b'chol kocho, then you really got to roll up your sleeves and get going. V'ra'isi anshe ma'aseh gedolei Torah, and the Chafetz Chaim writes that I have seen men of great deed who were gedolei Torah, who were really Torah giants. Shahayu mechabdim habayis ba'atzmim b'yamim haktorim. They themselves would sweep the house and clean the house on Erev Shabbos, kidei shelo yitchalel Shabbat, so that Shabbos is not desecrated by not being ready in time. V'zehu chiyuv gamur al kol adam, and this is every person's obligation. No one can say that, I'm absolved from this mitzvah. The ma'ishna de'ein lo mi sheyachin o shehishliach ein lo kanai. He says, what difference does it make whether a person has someone to do it or whether the person that he's assigned doesn't have time to get to all of it? In any event, you're going to be left empty-handed, or you're going to be left short-handed, and you're going to need to roll up your sleeves and get to work. So even if you have people to work in the house for you, you still have to do some of the work on your own. You got to get ready for Shabbos. And even if it means getting the candles ready and taking care of giving the kids a bath or whatever it is, every person has an obligation to do this, and no one can absolve themselves by saying that I'm too important to engage in these things. Okay, so with this in mind, what I wanted to do is take a look at the Likutim, who quotes this halacha from Hilchos Shabbos, and let's take a look how he deals with it.
Rabbi, is there an obvious difference that returning a lost object is very public, and what you do to prepare for Shabbos is within your home, so you're not publicly embarrassed for doing menial labor?
It could be, although then the argument would be is that if people can see you going outside to the front of your house to get the firewood and chopping it on your property, then you would have to make the argument that a person can exempt themselves from doing that if it's a public activity. But that doesn't seem to be stated. It doesn't seem to say that it's okay. It's okay if you only do it in the privacy of your home. Okay. So anyway, if you take a look, he says like this. Oh, and by the way, Ron, you had asked a question yesterday. We'll get back to that in just a minute, okay? In any event, it says, B'shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Siman Reish Nun Sif Aleph, He'etik Divrei Hashas, Shabbos Kuf Yotes, Sherav Chisda HaYemachateh Chayerek L'Chavad HaShabbos. So the Shulchan Aruch, he says, quotes this Gemara, I should say, that Rav Chisda used to cut up the vegetables on Friday. The Rabba of Rav Yosef hayu mevakim eitzim. Rabba and Rav Yosef used to chop the wood. The Rabbi Zera hayu madlik ha'esh. Rabbi Zera would light the fire, etc. Kizehu kvodo shemechabed haShabbat, because that is one's honor. One only adds to their honor by honoring Shabbos. The Kosav Sham HaPri Megadim, so the Pri Megadim commentary writes, the Davka Bazeh shenikar she'osa l'chvod Shabbat. So the distinction, instead of what Paul had suggested as far as public versus private, the Pri Megadim's distinction is that it's recognizable when you're doing this action that you're doing it out of honor of Shabbos. Masha'en kein im ein nikar, k'mo zakein ve'enu l'chvodo ba'avedu chedoma. But if it's not recognizable, when you look at a person and you see he's cutting vegetables or he's chopping firewood and it's Friday at 11 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon, it's patently obvious that he's doing this for Shabbos. But when you see an elder statesman walking through the city, schlepping a donkey through the city, it's not patently obvious that he's doing it to return a lost item. Shemitchalel kavod hatalmid chacham al yedei zeh, she'ein hakol yodim shehu osek b'mitzvah. He says because what you're causing when people don't realize why you're schlepping a donkey through town is they think that this is degrading, and they think that you're sort of lowering yourself, and not everyone can see that you're doing it for the sake of a mitzvah. The Kasav al Zeh Habir Halacha, and the Bir Halacha commentary, which he really encapsulates, so we don't have to read it inside. He says, Dibazeh miyushav hadiita b'kiddushin daf ayin. With this, we can answer that which the Gemara says in Maseches Kiddushin, the Rav Nachman osak ba'atzmo b'mitzvahs ma'akeh. Rav Nachman had a rooftop on his house that needed a ma'akeh, that needed a parapet, a fence, to protect people from falling off, which is a Torah obligation. And he himself insisted on building it. Sheshamhu davar sha'kol yodin ba'et shehu osek shehu mitzvahs Hashem. Anyone who sees a rabbi going up to his roof and building a parapet immediately recognizes that he's doing it for a mitzvah. There's nothing degrading for him to put on his overalls and to put on his, his carpenter cap and to go up to the roof and start hammering away. Masha'ein kein ba'aveda ba'et shehu mitapel ba ein hakol yodim mizeh. But when it comes to a lost object, a guy's going to be schlepping something through town. Not everyone sees. It's not patently obvious that he's engaged in the mitzvah of returning a lost item. V'lachein afilu im yirtze lahachziro birabim v'yodiem shehi aveda gam kein patraso haTorah mizeh ad kan tochen devara. And therefore, even if a person wishes to do the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, and he wants to tell people, I'm doing this because I'm returning a lost item, but not everyone will hear him. And that's the reason why the Torah exempts this person, if it's beneath his dignity to engage in this kind of item. The Torah gives him a dispensation, an exemption from this mitzvah. And then the Likutim quotes the Shilas Tshuvas Chavas Yoyer from the 17th century, Rav Yehuda Bachrach, who writes as follows: Shetalmid Chacham u'Gdolei Hador mitaplim ba'atzmam ba'asiyat sukkah b'Rosh Hashanah v'chatzer b'Reshut Harabim v'chatzer hamefulash. Sorry, that Talmidei Chachamim and great community leaders should themselves engage in the building of a sukkah, even in a public area where everyone can see what they're doing. V'chein b'she'ivas mayim lematzas mitzvah derech reshus harabim. Or let's say if they want to participate in the mitzvah of baking matzahs, and they got to go down to the well to schlep water, which is considered to be a menial task, that's okay. They can go down and schlep water for the sake of making matzah. V'chein gedolei hador einam nimnoim hitchaber lechaburat kavranim ba'oskim b'chafiras kever v'tzarchei hameis. And similarly, great rabbis can join together and should. It's virtuous for them to join together with the grave diggers to help take care of the needs of the deceased. As we know that, when you go to a funeral, usually it's very distinguished people who engage in the shoveling of the dirt. The Sham Kasav, the Dafka b'mitzvah shel mamona, yesh lihimona l'das harash, v'hashevas aveda mikri mamona. And so the Chavas Yoyer says the same idea. It's only when it comes to a mitzvah that involves giving back someone an object of monetary value that we say that you can withdraw from doing the mitzvah if it's beneath your honor, beneath your dignity. But Masha'ein came b'mitzvah shebinin adam l'makom. But if it comes to a mitzvah that's between you and God, and v'hu adin gemilus chesed l'sameach chatan v'kala u'chedome, he says, and also if it, let's say, a mitzvah of gemilus chesed, of doing chesed, let's say to cause a bride and a groom to rejoice, right? Ein bo mishum bizoy kavod haTorah. There is nothing degrading about that at all. There's no degradation to the honor of a Torah scholar. And because it's, like we said in the Pri Megadim, it's self-evident that you're doing it for the mitzvah. And we have an example of this in the Gemara in Ksuvos. The Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi havi miraked im bad shel hadas. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi would, at a wedding, he would take a myrtle branch and dance with it in front of the bride and groom. In other words, he didn't say to himself, it's beneath my honor to dance before the bride and the groom and make a bit of a fool of myself. No, when it came to their honor, when it came to their rejoicing, he was very careful to put his honor aside. Va'amru lo shemevazeh bazeh a talmid chacham. And people told him, Rabbi, why are you doing this? That's only something that, a paid professional dancer would do. Why are you doing this? Aval be'emes zacha b'petirato la'amuda denura va'amru sham demahanya le'shutita desaba ayin sham. But the fact is that when he died, the Gemara testified that there was a beam of light or a pillar of fire, different ways of translating it, that hovered over his grave. And people said it was because of that myrtle branch that he danced with at the weddings, that because he put his own honor aside to do a chesed, that's the reason why he merited this miraculous phenomenon. V'shamdan hachavos yar le'inyan talmid chacham sheyodea nagain in kama kalei zemer. And the Chavos Yair deliberates over the following question. You have a great Torah scholar who's also a very skilled musician. And Imrei Rashut biyado l'nagen lifnei chatan kala behilucha lechupa v'seuda. Does the Talmud Chacham have the permission to act as the wedding singer or as the musician to play musical instruments for the bride and groom? Umasik sham v'zel lishono, and his conclusion is, and I quote, "B'chol hanohi kalut ba'atzmo l'tzorach gavoa u'mitzvat Hashem," that anyone who acts degradingly about themselves, in other words, if they make light of themselves, but they do so for the sake of doing a mitzvah for Hashem, av she'ena mitzvah sasei mamish rak milut chasadim she'alfinan me v'halachta bidrachav, even though it's not, you can't identify it specifically as one of the 613 mitzvahs, but rather it's under the general category of being kind to others, like God is kind to us. Such a person is praiseworthy, and may a blessing befall him. So you see from here that this is the distinction. If anything, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda is the exception to the rule and not the rule. When it comes to all other mitzvot or opportunities for chesed to do for other people, no one should ever stand on their honor, should stand on ceremony and say, no, it's beneath my dignity to do X, Y, or Z. It's only when it comes to a monetary mitzvah, and like the Pri Megadim said, where not everyone is aware of what you're doing, and so therefore they can't, the public eye does not correlate what you're doing to a mitzvah prima facie. That's where we say that you can exempt yourself. When I saw this piece in the Likutim, it reminded me of a headline that I had seen a few years ago. I couldn't find it in my Google search. There was a controversy in Israel a few years back where there was a group of Orthodox rabbis who were officiating at weddings, and they were doing it without a fee. That was the first thing that got members of the people involved in the bureaucracy of the Israeli rabbinate upset, because they were undercutting the rabbinic fee that people normally get, and they were also volunteering not only to officiate but also to sing under the chuppah, so that if a secular couple was hiring a band that didn't know the traditional music, at least the rabbi could sing the words for the traditional, Baruch Haba and all of these other things. And there was a backlash against these rabbis who were doing this. And one of the arguments was, what rabbi makes himself into a wedding singer, right? That's not an honorable way for a rabbi to present himself to the public, right? A rabbi's a rabbi. He's a scholar. What is he doing crooning under the chuppah, right? And so that was part of the argument against these young rabbis who were volunteering their time. And by the way, they were doing it specifically. Why were they doing it? Because there was a perception at the time that secular couples were very turned off by the rabbinate's insistence upon a lot of bureaucratic red tape, and it wasn't user friendly, and it was costing them money, and it was, it was joyless in the way that it was being presented to them. It's sort of like the part of the Israeli bureaucracy is that's the unfortunate reality of the Rabbanut HaRashit, of the chief rabbinate, is that it's part of that. It's part of that political bureaucracy. And so this group of cadre of a whole bunch of young rabbis basically put themselves forward and said, you want to get married, we'll take care of it. There's no fee. We'll sit down with you. We'll explain everything to you. We'll make your wedding lebedik, and we'll make it joyful, and so forth. So that was the whole. And by the way, it's gotten much better as a result since then. But this piece reminded me, because the Chavos Yair deals directly with the shaila of whether a rabbi can croon under the chuppah and act as the musician. And the answer here is, of course, you're engaged in a mitzvah. Why shouldn't you? That's why, I've been asked a few times in the past if I wouldn't mind singing under the chuppah. And every time I've said with the greatest of pleasure, because that's part of the mitzvah, especially if, a lot of times, when they hire a non-Jewish band, for the, a more modern couple who may not have the more religious sensibilities, they'll hire a non-Jewish band. The non-Jewish band may have like 3 or 4 songs in their whole repertoire that are Jewish, and so they need some help under the chuppah with the music, with the musical accompaniment of Baruch Haba, Mi Adir, Mi Bansiach, and all of those other things. Okay, so I just wanted you to see that. That's a very important caveat to this halacha. Questions, comments? Okay. Ron, what was your question yesterday that we were a little bit rushed to get through?
I was just mentioning about my mother's insistence about the honor of how people are seated at the Shabbos table, and a priority about who's sitting closest to the father, and how the brothers are, especially a Pesach when you have, let's say, larger family, how priority of how people are sitting around the table. And I mean, this was something, especially of their generation, of honor, even when there was seating going for weddings, about how people are seated at the weddings and how close they are to the front. And this was just a thing that was going on in their generation.
Right. I'm just trying to remember, how did we get on to that question? Was it had to do with showing proper honor to a revered elder person, or is that how we got onto that question? Just trying to remember.
Forget how we got onto that.
But anyway, just to answer your question, the answer is that if you can make your mother happy by organizing the seating, then by all means, that's what kibbud aim is all about. Showing honor to a parent is respecting their wishes, especially when it doesn't cost anything. Is unless, of course, you'd have to make an argument why not heeding your mother's demand or request will result in less strife, or will result in something better than listening to your mother. I don't know.
My question was also, though, do I have to continue the tradition
in the absence of your mother?
Yes.
I don't think you have an obligation to continue a tradition if it was something that Jewish law doesn't require, and there's no. If you don't feel there's any rhyme or reason to the minhag, no, you don't have to continue that particular tradition. You can. It's your home. You can run it as you see fit.
I was just going to suggest there's a little bit of a Torah source coming up in Parshas shortly about how Yosef put the brothers in particular order when he sat down with them. based on age. I mean, it revealed what he knew about them. I appreciate it's not necessarily Ron's question, but it's interesting that I think it's next week or week after, I think.
Yeah, it's in Parshas Miketz, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that'll be a week from the Shabbos, exactly. Yeah. There is such a concept. Anyone who's ever been to Hearst Castle may have heard the story about how William Randolph Hearst,
Yes, the rabbi promised to tell us the story.
yeah, used to host people for extended periods of time at Hearst Castle. And Hearst Castle is this huge mansion on the coast when you drive up from Southern California to Northern California. It's one of those things, sort of like a must-see kind of place, because the amount of money that went into building Hearst Castle, like in today's, using today's dollar, would be in the billions of dollars. Just it's the level of attention to detail is just magnificent. It's uncanny. In any event, and I'm sure there's certain skills that couldn't even be replicated today because we don't have those skills anymore, handmade skills. So, but they told the story because they showed us his dining room, which was huge, and his dining room table was huge. And it was basically this very, very long wooden table that had chairs around it. And the rule was that when you came, if you were invited to Hearst Castle, you were never told when it was time to leave. You could stay as long as you wanted. But what if you overstayed your welcome? So the only way that you would get a hint is that your chair would be slowly moved further and further away from the head of the table. And that was a way of signaling to you that it was time for you to leave. But no one would ever tell you it was time to go. So if you ever find yourself at the end of the table at William Randolph Hearst's house, you'll know the reason why. But I always find that a funny story to tell to people when we try to do seating diplomatically at our Shabbos table, because there's always some level of awkwardness. And I basically said to Karen that's her job. I'll do something else, but I don't want to do the seating at the Shabbos table. It's too difficult for me. Anyway. All right. Let us, we were really in the middle of the text. So basically the way we got onto this discussion is, again, what we're saying is that a zaken can exempt himself because the Torah says, V'hit alamta, that there are times when you may hide yourself or refrain from engaging in this lost object based on the fact that it's zaken ve'eno lefi chavodo. So, and the rule of thumb, the litmus test as to whether you could use this exemption is ilu haya shelo im haya machzirim la'atzmo kachu chayav lahachzir shel chavero. That the rule is that you have to ask yourself the question, if this was your lost object, if you owned a donkey and it was lost and you had to go to retrieve it by going into the public sphere in order to schlep your donkey back home, would you do it for your own lost object? And if the answer is yes, then you have to do it for your friend as well, even though normally it would be considered to be a degrading act. But v'im lo haya mochel al kvodo, afim hayu shalo, kach b'shel chavero eno chayev la'achzir. So, but if it's not something that you would have done for your own lost object, because you would have stood on ceremony and you would not have degraded yourself publicly, even if it meant losing your object, so then you can exempt yourself from retrieving your friend's object. And then we saw Hayadarko Lisa Kalam Elu Bisadeh, Ve'ein Darko Lisa Osam Ba'ir. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch just continues to give us illustrations that if it was normal for you to schlep these things out in the field away from the public scrutiny, but not to schlep them in the city when you're dressed and bedecked in your proper rabbinic attire, so then mitzam be'ir enu chayiv lahachzir, mitzam besada chayiv lahachzir. So then it depends where you find it. If you find it out in the farmland, so then you have to engage in it. But if you find it in the city, where you wouldn't normally be caught in the public eye in the city doing this kind of activity, so then you don't have to return it. And we will continue with this discussion in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow. Okay, so everyone have a great day.
Have a great day.
We'll continue.
Right.